There are people who say euthanasia should be available to absolutely anyone who's struggling. And while I know these people mean well, they clearly haven't thought it all the way through, and in some cases even part way through. Firstly, there is a difference between euthanasia and voluntary euthanasia, and a difference between voluntary assisted suicide and voluntary euthanasia. Now, this isn't me just being pedantic. There are legal complications for each term. And as far as suggesting everyone who's struggling, well, I could go on forever about that choice of words. But let's look at one of the most commonly brought up issues when it comes to voluntary assisted dying, and that is accessing it for those with dementia. Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk voluntary assisted dying and dementia. Now, I want to make it very clear here. I believe those with dementia should have access to voluntary assisted dying. Dementia Care Australia believes they should have access to voluntary assisted dying. And while most people would say they never want to live with dementia, and my father's words, just shoot me if he ever got diagnosed with it, voluntary assisted dying is not the easy option it seems to be in this situation. What is voluntary assisted dying? So we have an entire video that explains the process of VAD in Australia, all the way from inquiring about it, all through to after it's done. So please go back and look at that if you want more details. And as always, there will be a link in the description. But in a nutshell, every state in Australia now has voluntary assisted dying legislation on the books and in effect. These laws allow terminally ill adults to request and receive medication to end their lives. The laws have specific eligibility criteria, including being over a certain age and having a terminal illness that is causing suffering and/or is expected to cause death within 6 to 12 months, depending on the stage and the condition. Other criteria specifies that the individual must have decision-making capacity throughout the entire process, and that VAD cannot be included in an advanced care plan or in substitute decision-making powers. These are points to keep in mind as we go through this. What is dementia? The term dementia describes a collection of symptoms caused by disorders affecting the brain. It is not one specific disease. It affects thinking, memory, and behavior. Brain function is affected enough to interfere with someone's normal social or working life. Alzheimer's is only one condition that causes dementia, and it is the most well known, but there are over 100 conditions that cause dementia. Symptoms of dementia start small and progressively get worse. These include memory loss, changes in planning and problem-solving abilities, difficulty completing everyday tasks, confusion about time or place, trouble understanding what we see and distance, depth and space in our surroundings, difficulty with speech, writing or comprehension, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace their steps, decreased or poor judgment, withdrawal from work or social activities, and changes in mood and personality. Importantly, dementia is not a normal part of aging. That said, 1 in 10 people over 65 will suffer from dementia, and for those over 83, it is 1 in 3. People under 65 can also be diagnosed with dementia, including children. It is probably worth noting here, but dementia in itself doesn't kill you. It is the other parts of whatever condition you have that will eventually kill you, which is why the wording in these laws is so important. The argument for including dementia in voluntary assisted dying eligibility. Time for a bit of legal talk. In 2008, the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities acknowledged that people with disabilities, including those living with cognitive impairment and dementia, can have legal capacity. In accordance with this position, the degree of capability or decision-making abilities depends on the individual circumstances of the person with the disability. Given the variability of dementia trajectory, multiple assessments of decision-making ability might be required over the course of the disease. Dementia Australia supports the principles underpinning the Convention statement, noting that many people believe it is appropriate and respectful framework to consider the rights of people living with dementia in relation to VAD. However, Dementia Australia also emphasises that any decision must also be made in a way that is ethically rigorous and safeguards the interest of the individuals. And this is where we are having problems putting laws in place. There is also the case that we all have the right to die on our own terms, something I wholeheartedly agree with. But that just means you have the right to die, i.e. suicide is no longer illegal. It doesn't say what right you have to the means of dying, which is where this argument gets caught up in all this red tape. Indeed, there are many arguments for dementia being included in VAD eligibility from all different angles. And we're not going to bother with the arguments against including it because they are the same old crap and not specific to the condition. But we will look at just why it is so difficult to make this legal. The challenges. So let's say someone is in the doctor's office and has been diagnosed with dementia. When do you say now's the time? When the person is first diagnosed, sure, they are showing signs, but they're not likely extreme yet. And the person is unlikely to say to the doctor, I want VAD right now. They have things they want to do, conversations they want to have. Hell, they might have a vacation booked for next month. And the doctor couldn't do it to them in that moment anyway because they have more than 6 to 12 months to live and accessing it doesn't just need one doctor's okay. Okay, so we're not using VAD at the time of diagnosis. Perhaps they want to go through some stuff, say their goodbyes, so perhaps in 2 months' time. But they are still feeling pretty good at this point and likely have many years in them and they don't want to end it yet. So maybe they make the call in advance that when they start to forget your name, then that's the time. But does that include when they forget just when they're sundowning or all the time? And when do you notice that? Because this is a day-to-day thing like watching your hair grow, you don't notice it. But let's say the laws change its wording and you no longer have to be competent when VAD actually happens. Do we say at the time of diagnosis the person writes down when they want it? A date, an event, a level of symptoms. It's hard to give a date when you don't know how you will be feeling then because dementia can go on for years. And if they do give a date but they are still with it at that time and say no, do you take this as a no or not? Perhaps they say when they no longer have independence, but that's different from everyone's perspective. And when the time comes that the person is written down, the dementia likely will be at the point where it will have made them very confused, which leads to fear, which leads to anger, which leads to violent outbursts. And how do you think that's going to go? How do you make them do it? Suddenly you have you want to kill all the old people crowd having a protest outside the door. Because remember, we have voluntary assisted dying laws, not voluntary euthanasia laws in Australia, which means that while they may have help, the person needs to be the one to take the pills or needle. How do you think that is going to go if they have no idea what is going on? And how do you think the family will feel watching them fight? That won't be peaceful in any way, and you can imagine the guilt. And I know some people will say, well, just give them a sedative first, but that complicates the consent question. That's taking away the voluntary part, isn't it? Think of it like consent for sex. At the start of sex, you both say you want this, all good. But halfway through you change your mind, in which case the ethical, moral and legal thing for the other person to do is to stop. And in order for someone to give consent to sex, they need to be able to do so. Having sex with someone who is not capable of giving consent is wrong. So what if they were able and in their right mind to give consent at the beginning when they said yes, but then whatever drugs or whatever kicked in halfway through? Legally, we would say that you shouldn't be having sex with someone who no longer has the ability to know what's going on, even if they haven't pulled their consent. Do you see where I'm going with this? You are asking the government to put laws in place to allow consent to be taken away, and that is a dangerous path to walk. The idea with VAD is that the person can pull their consent at any time. That is a big part of the safeguarding. Someone with 6 months to live and in great pain can say that they're going to do it on Tuesday, but that day may come and for whatever reason they don't feel like the time is right, so they change the day. That consent and voluntary nature of these laws, putting it 100% in the patient's hands, is what keeps the safeguarding in place. And that is why it is so damn complicated. And I want to put a quote from an article written by a psychiatrist and a doctor who specialise in old age, and the article will be in the description, as a way of showing where taking that consent away may lead. Most people with dementia do not suffer, as they have limited awareness of their incapability and functional decline. Family members can be distressed on their behalf. But should we allow assisted death to spare the suffering of relatives or to prevent theoretical future individual suffering that might never occur? While voluntary assisted dying might seem a liberating option for some, it could also become a duty or obligation for others. Assisted dying is a quick, cheap option for families and governments. Currently, those with dementia have a legitimate expectation of care, but if assisted dying is available, they will have to choose between care and death. Elder abuse is widespread, with 1 in 5 aged people being affected. This is often perpetrated by close family members. Inheritance impatience is also well recognised. The availability of voluntary assisted dying can be a disincentive for governments to provide better aged care options and limit research efforts as well. And if you have never been around or cared for the elderly or someone dealing with dementia, I would think very carefully before making ill-informed comments arguing against the legitimacy of those points. Well, other countries have it. The Netherlands legalised voluntary assisted dying for people with dementia in the early 2000s, with citizens able to lodge an advance request to die following their diagnosis. It is then up to the families and doctors to activate the plan. However, it is rarely followed through on, in part because many doctors and families feel uncomfortable granting wishes without the patient being able to reaffirm consent. In 2021, only 6 people with advanced dementia died using the laws in the Netherlands, but there were 209 others who ended their lives in the earlier stages of the condition, while they were deemed mentally competent to do so. Belgium allows assisted dying for dementia, but the laws are stringent and it rarely occurs. In Canada, people with dementia were recently granted access to assisted dying, but they must request it and end their lives while they still have the mental capacity. So yes, there are laws accepting it in other countries, but again, how you follow through on those laws is a lot more complex than it sounds. So what do you think about all this? Let us know in the comments. This is another one of those issues which is not as simple as it first appears. And it's certainly not as black and white when you're actually in that situation. The laws we have in place currently are good and solid and safe. Yes, they exclude a lot, but we are new to it by comparison to a lot of other countries, and eligibility will open up with time. And if you want to know more about how other countries feel about all this, please go and check out this video and the link will be in the description. Now, go talk death.